Welcome, everyone. We're here with Erin Axelrod, who is a partner at Lift Economy. Lift Economy is a impact consulting firm helping grow social enterprises to basically be more socially and environmentally responsible, improve their culture, improve their vision and operations. My name is Ryan Hundyman. I'm also a partner at Lift Economy. And the goal behind this interview series is just to get a sense of what some of the Lyft partners are seeing in terms of next economy companies and cool ideas. And also some of the future interviews will be with thought leaders like John Abrams from South Mountain Company, John Rulak from Nutiva. And so we're really looking to get a sense of who's living the next economy, and then how can we learn, be educational for the viewers, like how can we learn from these leaders? And so Erin was kind enough to join me because she's based up in the North Bay, in the San Francisco Bay Area, in Petaluma, and has access to a lot of cool companies near her. And so I'm a newer Lyft partner, and I'm just interested in, Erin, so what are some of the cool things you're seeing up there? Like, what are some of the companies that you're most excited? Like, what are the practices that you're most excited about seeing up there where you are?
Yeah, well, thanks for that, Ryan. I'm really interested and excited by these new companies that are just getting started, that are kind of still in the proof of concept and feasibility stage. And they are starting up out of a ecosystem that is really recognizing that we need to take advantage of all the resources that are produced here in this bioregion. And one such community is the Mendocino Wool Mill, and that has not yet started, but they've been in deep design of what this company is going to look like for the past 2 to 3 years, and it really is emerging out of a critical need that relates to a lot of the land stewards all over Sonoma County and all over California, frankly, which is a lot of these farmers and ranchers that are producing wool. They're keeping sheep for various reasons, grazing on the landscape, keeping fire fuels reduction load down, and they're producing this wool, but it's all going to the landfill because they don't have any place locally to process it into a high-quality raw ingredient, a high-quality thread called top, that can then be used in industrial manufacturing. On the flip side, we've got all these bigger companies like Patagonia, the North Face, Eileen Fisher, which are looking at ways to improve the regenerative ability, the ability to leverage their following, their business, their supply chain to support local producers and to support regenerative land-based practices. And they don't have a direct way to connect with these producers. So I'm really excited about the Mendocino Wool Mill because it would give that opportunity. They're scoping it at the ability to produce 2,000 pounds, or the ability to process 2,000 pounds of raw wool a month, which at this point probably wouldn't be enough for all the larger designer brands, but it will be enough to do a feasibility assessment at the profitability of a small decentralized wool mill that would be owned by the community. So it actually is going to be community financed through a direct public offering that's being done right now through the Economic Development Corporation up there in Mendocino. And over the past 2 months, they've raised more than $160,000 towards their $250,000 goal, which is incredible. It's really what Naomi Klein, an amazing thought leader, is talking about in terms of democratically controlled infrastructure, especially in our realm of clean power, clean energy, clean manufacturing. And so I'm really excited about that. That's just one nugget that's been exciting me a lot in terms of moving the economic incentives for more people to keep sheep on the land.
Yeah. So Erin, you mentioned a few terms I just would love to get defined. So what is what are the terms bio? You said something about bioregion,
Mm.
I think a lot of people know what it is, but a lot of people don't. Also, so what's bioregion, and then also what is the term regenerative, just to kind of define some of these terms.
Great. So bioregion is really fun. So when I think about a bioregion, I think about a watershed. So a watershed is defined by the ridge lines around a given location that define where, when it rains, where all the water falls, and if it sheds off of a ridge line into one watershed or another watershed. So the ridge lines are the high points in a region that divide up the river basins. So that's a watershed. A bioregion, very similarly, is a boundary marker that contains a specific locale, a specific region, and you can define it a lot of different ways. The 100-mile food diet would be a definition of a bioregion, because you're putting boundaries on how far you'll go to access the resources that you need. So you've heard about a lot of people taking this 100-mile food diet challenge to eat locally, the localism, locavore.
Yeah.
A bioregion, very similarly, is the area that I rely on immediately around me, around my home, my neighborhood, my town, community, to access certain things like food, shelter, fiber, energy, and water. So that's kind of loosely how I define a bioregion. And the word bio is in there because it really is based in the biology of that region, the photosynthesis of the plants, the interactions of the animals that provide the natural capital that really is at the core of all of our businesses, right? We can think that financial capital is what drives our businesses, when in reality, we've got to get back to the recognition that all financial capital ultimately is derived from that initial biological processes, the photosynthesis, the carbohydrates, the proteins, that sustain all of life on this planet.
Right. And then so regenerative, define that for me, just so I have better understanding.
So regenerative ties in with that because my vision for an economy is an economy where every bite we eat gives back more to the bioregion than we take away. So right now, I often am faced a lot of times with my clients right now. Many of the small businesses that I work with are very frustrated because they feel like there are certain aspects of their business that are in misalignment with this ethos of being regenerative. A regenerative bite would be a meal that is farm to table, that that all of the food that was harvested was wild harvested, wild foraged mushrooms, wild foraged bay nuts, wild foraged greens, dry farm Sonora wheat from a local farm. And the reason why it's regenerative versus another plate of food is that there was the aquifers were recharged by growing that dry farmed potato or the dry farmed tomato. You weren't actually drilling for water elsewhere, importing it to grow that tomato, but maybe you put in water harvesting earthworks or rainwater catchment that actually helped to improve that ecosystem's capacity to regenerate and to become more resilient.
So it's basically
I think,
like a net positive. Kevin and I were talking about this, sort of like a net positive outcome versus something that's kind of taking away when you grow it. Is that sort of?
Yes, yeah. Net positive in terms of we even have the technology, we've had the technology, but we're finessing and providing even a finer point look at the ways that we can grow our food that is climate beneficial, so it actually sequesters more carbon dioxide, turns it into soil carbon than not. So we're increasingly improving our knowledge of how we can work with nature to help her heal herself. There's been for a long period of time, the thought was that if we just stayed away from nature, kept her in nature preserves and wilderness areas, that was how we would get back some of the ecosystems that we've lost. And there's growing knowledge and research and awareness now that might not work. We actually need to accelerate the regeneration, the healing of our natural capital in order to be able to sustain the types of population we have, the types of needs that our population and our communities really need to thrive and grow. So
awesome. You mentioned a term that I've heard more and more recently over the last year, this term carbon farming, sort of sequestering carbon through sequestering carbon in the soil as a means of reducing global warming. And it's when I first heard about it, I thought this is the answer, quote unquote, to solving all of our problems. I thought, we'll just do carbon farming and it'll draw out all the carbon out of the air. Alan Savory, one of the famous practitioners of this, maybe even one of the inventors, has a great TED talk about sort of regeneration of farmland through grazing cattle in ways that sequester carbon and restore the environment. But what are your thoughts on carbon farming? Is this kind of a technology or a solution that can solve all of our challenges, or is it just part of the solution, or is it not really, there's not much meat to it? What do you think?
Oh man, that's such a great question, and I love carbon farming. I try and practice it in my daily life and in my choices. I try and select as much as possible when I eat meat for grass-fed meat that actually my friend Ariel and one of our another Next Economy businesses that we work with, Holistic Ag, grows up at Pepperwood Preserve. And I think carbon farming is more than just a silver bullet. I hate that term, but more than just a silver bullet solution. Carbon farming, to me, provides an opportunity for broad-based awareness about how we as individuals can get back into balance with the carbon cycle, right? So we are carbon-based life forms. And what's happened since the awareness around CO2, the 405 parts per million of carbon dioxide that we now have in our atmosphere, that is one of the contributors to global warming, part of that growing awareness has been this vilification of carbon dioxide, which carbon dioxide in our atmosphere is problematic, but it's not carbon that is the villain. Carbon cycles organically around the planet, and the problem is that we're out of balance. There's more carbon in the atmosphere than there is in our soils, and if we can get back to agricultural practices that take that carbon out of the atmosphere and turn it into soil carbon that we can then use as a nutrient to grow our food and grow our meat and grow our nutrition, that is what carbon farming to me is so exciting. That's why carbon farming is so exciting, because that process of pulling CO2 out of the atmosphere, it's called photosynthesis. It's been happening for thousands of years, and to me, there's such an opportunity now with the growing interest from businesses who they have a choice to buy RECs, to buy other sort of carbon offsets, but they're looking more at how can I actually support the regeneration of this specific plot of land, or support a farmer in my community, and do carbon offsets that way. And carbon offsets essentially just means taking a baseline measurement of how much CO2 or emissions that your company's manufacturing processes produce, and then seeing if there's ways that you can offset that by planting trees, for example, or other aspects. Reducing your energy use would be another example of an offset. But what I'm noticing is this trend in big companies like Nutiva, like Patagonia Provisions, like Patagonia, like Eileen Fisher, that are asking, how do I do carbon offsets in a way that's got even more teeth to it, and in a way that's not just being less bad, so reducing my energy use, but actually is asking, how can I be of more good, right? Which is very much of the B Corp mindset. And oftentimes being of more good can look like the magical relationship of having a company fund a dramatic reforestation project that will not only sequester tons of carbon, especially if you do it in a riparian corridor area, but can also provide habitat benefits, attract beneficial insects, provide habitat for our struggling bees, provide and even provide harvestable crops. Like mesquite would be an example of a crop that you could plant in a hedgerow and then harvest, to provide other streams of revenue for farmers. And why that's so important is that we need to keep financial incentives for people to be on the land in land-based jobs. We need more people entering into farming and agriculture and land-based jobs because, frankly, I believe that our human relationship with the land is what's going to heal many of our environmental challenges.
Interesting. So the land-based connection is, and I have heard some recent talk, specifically Charles Eisenstein at a TED Talk where he referenced that connection. So, why is that important for someone? I can see where if you're in an agricultural industry, like your connection with the land is important, but why would say a business, like a retail clothing company, or how do they maintain that connection, and why is that important for them?
The connection to the land is critical because it takes us out of this. When you're in front of a computer, it's really easy to start thinking of the reality of the forces at play as simplistic, kind of able to be contained within spreadsheets and documents. And in reality, ecosystems don't function like that. They're living, breathing, constantly evolving, constantly iterating. The feedback loops happen much more rapidly, and there's much more kind of nuance and flexibility that you have to be observed and attuned to. We need to weave in more of the qualitative analysis. Qualitative analysis is what you get when you recognize that there's 100 different ways to achieve building or boosting your soil fertility on the landscape, and it all depends on any given day what the climate is like, how the sun, what the solar exposure is on your landscape. That changes day by day and week to week. Yeah. And so all these different factors at play, I think being present with the landscape really just kind of cultivates a different approach to coming up with solutions that's not so myopic, that's not so constrained by what a spreadsheet or a document might say. And one other fine point on this is that there's another really exciting body of knowledge that is about our individual physical health as it relates to presence on the landscape. I know it by Shinrin-yoku, which is a Japanese word that means forest bathing. And forest bathing directly refers to this study that was done by the Japanese, actually, Department of Health in the 80s, where they hypothesized that yes, in fact, exposure to nature cultivates better health. And so what they did is they looked at cortisol levels, the stress levels, they looked at blood pressure, and they looked at white blood cells and in these subjects, and they measured them just before a moderate one hour walk in the woods, and then just after. And what they found was that cortisol levels dropped hugely. White blood cells count went up, and blood pressure dropped as well. And we know this. We know it because we love going for walks. People organically in the workplace go out for a walk to rest and de-stress. But what the scientific data backed up is that we actually need moderate. I'm talking about moderate walks. I'm not talking about a hike. I'm talking about the effect of the bacteria that are out in forested ecosystems or on prairie landscapes, that when you walk through there and you're interacting with those non-human forms of life, you're actually getting health benefits that you can never achieve in a sterile sort of office environment with which these big HVAC systems and all of that. And so it's really essential that we have healthy people doing this work of building our next economy.
Yeah.
So that's just another nugget that I really try and convey in my coaching with my clients is, are you getting the time out on the land? Are you connecting with that? Are you providing those health benefits to yourself? And are you also paying attention to what actually is happening? Has it rained in the past week? What is the state of our aquifers? What is the state? Because all of that affects all the aspects of our economy, whether it's the ranchers that supply our food, or the ability of us to supply municipal water needs.
Thanks, Erin. I know that in kind of addition to the carbon farming, generally you're also doing some work on carbon insetting with the Pure project. I wonder if you could just briefly describe, what that is and how does that relate to the carbon farming, which you described a little earlier.
Yeah. So the Pure project is great. It's a really interesting project that came out of a company called Alter Eco, and they make chocolate. And they found kind of that they wanted to do more than the solutions presented to them in terms of their carbon offsets. So they came up with a system where they've now offset all of their carbon emissions for the past 5 years of doing business at Alter Eco through direct reforestation projects in these Central American countries that they source cacao from. And so they're directly reforesting with the cacao plant that they then use and harvest from to make the chocolate. Sorry, I'm getting a little sun here, but maybe we'll work with it. And what's really interesting about the Pure Projet model is that not only do they do the initial planting of the trees, but they then pay the farmer to maintain the tree for 30 years after planting. So it's a really long-term investment in something that is really going to make a difference. And those carbon offsets are that much more verified because they've built in a system of maintenance that's going to ensure that those trees are not going to get cut down immediately, that they're going to be well taken care of and watered at least to get established. And so what I've been doing with the Pure Project is really just kind of information sharing. And it came out of a carbon farm tour that I hosted earlier this year, where nearly 40 business leaders attended this tour, all with the same question that you posed earlier. How do we engage in this realm of carbon farming? Is this a solution for our business that's also a solution for some of the planetary crises that we're facing? And so Alter Eco came on that tour, and we are really in this conversation together right now about what it would look like for Pure Project to not only invest in supply chains that are elsewhere outside of the U.S., but what would it look like given all the fires that have plagued California and the Pacific Northwest this past summer? What would it look like to actually do some reforestation for the farmers that have been hit hardest by some of these wildfires, and do reforestation that not only can give them the prospects of selling some of those products, raw products off of those trees, harvesting from those trees, or even coppicing to harvest multiple times the woody material to use as a source of raw materials, but also setting up systems that are going to be less susceptible to fires in the future. So setting up systems that will be very resilient, reducing fuel loads, making sure they're tended and used so that they don't accumulate all this woody debris that causes the fires in the first place. A lot of people don't realize that the fires that plagued California and the Pacific Northwest, a lot of it has actually been because of mismanagement of our forests, where we've just left them alone and haven't been harvesting trees from them. We haven't been harvesting the woody material, the undergrowth, just left it to kind of die and decay. And what happens is the term is fire ladders. All that woody material then creates these fire ladders that allows small fires to get out of control really fast because they've got so much fuel to burn all at once. And they start jumping up into the crowns of trees and then jumping to other trees, which is what creates these huge fires. The California Fire Department there are plenty of quotes and instances from people at work in the fire department that say they haven't seen fires of this magnitude in a long time. They're just increasing in scale and magnitude. And so I think we'll see a whole industry of new small startup companies and businesses, mostly driven by these land-based stewards that really understand the fire ecology and the ecosystems at play. I think we're going to see a growing number of people looking at fuels reduction as a business opportunity, whether it takes the form of grazing with sheep or harvesting for firewood. I think that's a real need in California. Otherwise, we're potentially going to lose a lot of our forest because we just don't have a way to manage the amount of acreage that we need to manage.
Great. Well, I think we'll probably end there, Erin, and then for the last few minutes, if folks want to stick around, we'll do probably 5 minutes interested in maybe this idea of how can businesses get involved in carbon farming? So maybe if you could just describe, assuming someone hasn't heard this whole 45 minutes, what carbon farming is and how someone could get involved. So thanks again for joining, and I'll kind of do another intro for folks who are just going to hear the first part of this. So thanks again, Erin.
Great. Thank you, Ryan.
So welcome, everyone. This is Ryan Honeyman. I'm a partner at Lift Economy, and today we're going to talk with Erin Axelrod, another partner at Lift. And Erin is an expert in regenerative, bioregional, self-sustaining economies, and one of her topics that she's most passionate about is carbon farming. And a lot of people have heard of this term carbon farming. And so for this, Lift Economy, what is the next economy in 5 minutes or less section, Erin's just going to answer what is carbon farming and how can business owners get involved who are interested in getting involved in carbon farming. So Erin, thanks for joining. And do you want to take those two questions?
Yeah. So carbon farming really is this idea that using photosynthesis, which is, I like to call it a technology that's been around for thousands and thousands of years. Photosynthesis essentially is just a plant breathing in CO2, atmospheric carbon, and combining it with water and sunlight to create actually soil carbon, so turning that into carbohydrates, which then after they decay and turn into organic material becomes soil carbon. And so carbon farming is just this idea that we can accelerate that natural process of photosynthesis through taking our financial resources that businesses might have and investing them in strategic ways in partnership with land stewards to increase the growth of perennial native grasses, increase the growth of riparian corridors, and essentially turn that atmospheric carbon into biomass on farms and ranches. What I love about carbon farming is it actually is looking to land-based stewards who oftentimes know these solutions at the core of their being, either it's at the core of their work ethic, and it's really looking to them as the leaders in this, and looking to them for the solutions. So I think a great way for businesses to start getting involved in carbon farming is actually just to reach out to Lift Economy, and we'll be able to talk with you. What are your goals in terms of offsets? How many have you gotten a baseline measurement of your emissions for your company so we can kind of target and benchmark how much carbon dioxide equivalents you'd like to offset through direct investment? After that, we can kind of connect you to farmers and land stewards who are really relevant to your particular business. A lot of clothing companies would be much more interested in connecting with a rancher on a large sheep ranch, for example, in California, where they might actually use wool in their supply chain. So that would be a very relevant partnership. And then our final, so first would be getting your baseline. What are your goals? What are your targets? Second would be coming up with some areas that you'd like to partner in, and then lastly, it's really case-by-case basis, developing those strategic partnerships that are mutually beneficial, because really, I think there's a risk with carbon farming that it becomes another transactional economy piece, and really we need to move away as much as possible from those sort of transactional, I'll pay you to soak up my pollution, and more into mutually synergistic relationships where both parties benefit, and the benefits just start multiplying as a result of that partnership.
Great. Well, thanks, Erin. And for those of you who are interested in learning more about carbon farming, Erin discusses that in detail in the larger part of this webinar. So keep on listening for folks who are interested. Otherwise, thanks, Erin, and we'll see you next time.
We'll probably have a workshop on carbon farming as well this year, so stay tuned for that.
Awesome. Thanks again, Erin.